Hello, thank you for joining me today again on the Church History Trail. And where we are now is we're actually inside the non-subscribing Presbyterian Church here at COMBER. And I have had a look inside here and it's absolutely brilliant. It is a lovely building. So we're going to have a wee look now, as you can see. So this building is absolutely beautiful. And I have to say, I have fallen in love with the ceiling. The ceiling is absolutely fantastic. Brilliant. But what we have here is we actually have 4 lovely stained glass windows. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to learn a wee bit about those stained glass windows. Hello.
Hello.
What's your name again? Sorry, I'm bad with
Gilpin.
names.
So my husband's the minister of the church.
Yes.
In Gilpin.
And what did you say your first name was?
Sandra.
Sandra. How did I forget that? And so what do these windows portray then, Sandra?
Well, they are memorial windows, and there was a bit of a discussion because obviously the Presbyterian Church, can you have anything like a stained glass window? That would be something very common in the mainstream Church of Ireland, the Roman Catholic churches,
yes.
But the Presbyterians mostly didn't have them. So quite a discussion about it. The first one that was actually commissioned was this one, which is called Peace. And this is in memory of Thomas Andrews' father, who was also called Thomas. So I think it's quite a fine window. Peace, Thomas Andrews Sr. dies in the middle of the war. He dies in 1916. So obviously peace is a huge thing for people at that time. We always say that people, they focus in on what they don't have, so peace would be the theme. So the window, quite consciously, the little dove, that is a reference to the family crest. And then the 2 above, we have got courage and humanity. So again, beautiful windows. They were actually put in the 1920s. The craftsmen who would have worked on these probably had been working on Victorian windows. So I think they're particularly fine. The ones
just before you move on to the other ones, now you says Thomas Andrews. Is this the same Thomas Andrews with the Titanic?
Yes, his father now, he had been working in the mill, which is a spinning mill in COMBER. Thomas was the only one of his sons to actually work for Harland and Wolff. He did that mainly because his mother's brother was William James Purry. So Thomas has gone as a young child, well, 16 I suppose, maybe not quite so young in those days. He had gone to work as an apprentice. He had lodged up in Belfast. And then he'd been home at the weekends. So every weekend he came home. He played cricket in COMBER. He also would have gone sailing, and he would have attended this church. So that would have been his
yes.
His
and so what's these other 2 then, Sandra?
Okay, this window was commissioned by Thomas's brother, William. Now William would have been, I think, 11 years younger than Thomas, and very fond of cricket. You can see the cricket bat and ball at the lady's feet. Now, it's not a true representation of William's family, but I think it's close enough in that he has got the 6 children of his parents. Now, the little child in his mother's arm, that is a little child who died at about 2 weeks. So it's not a really true representation. Even the ages, there should be 13 years between the oldest child and the youngest child. There's not 13 years in that window. But I think they were actually done maybe from pictures. And the interesting thing, I was actually looking at the biography of Thomas, and it does mention he has brown hair. And that's the first time that I've been sure that the boy in red is probably meant to be Thomas.
Very good.
I think that what we're seeing there is John Miller, who became the wartime Prime Minister in Stormont. He's in green. I think Thomas in red. I'm assuming that James, who became the Lord Chief Justice, did have that sandy-coloured hair. Obviously, you have the girl who was Nina. And then William, I presume, is a child who's looking up at his mother, who's holding the book.
Very good. And what about the top one then, Sandra?
Just before we leave it, the building behind is actually the family home, Ardara.
All right, yes.
That still stands, and actually, if you're ever up there, that is a very good representation of that particular building. So the children were all born in Ardara, and then a very close-knit family, and the grave outside, all the family members are buried in it, with the exception of Thomas, because of course his body was not recovered after the loss of Titanic.
Yes. And Ian, is there anything that you would like to add?
Really just to say that we're very, very fortunate to have 6 stained glass windows.
Oh, I never actually seen those 2 as well.
So the,
I never noticed them.
Front four, they would go in the 1920s.
And is there a history with these
Well,
two?
this is actually my favourite one. So
Oh,
if you
yes.
want to come over?
Yep, that's great. I never noticed them, I have to say.
So this is Faith, Hope and Charity.
Yes.
And in the bottom one, done in the 1920s, and while I think in the 1960s the family had no problem that they were being represented in that modern window, with this one I don't think they would have admitted it. But if you take a careful look at it, what I like about it is this is a window that is paid for by a woman and actually has representation of the woman in her family.
Yes.
So you'll see it's in memory of her mother, and she is the lady who's doing the charitable work. We think it might be Elizabeth of Hungary. The lady behind, I think, is a donor, who would be Thomas Andrews' mother. The young girl with the auburn hair, I think, is Thomas's sister. And
Yes.
again, the previous window, she had the auburn hair. So I'm fairly sure that is the family. Now, the gentleman behind, that is her uncle John Miller. He was a distiller in Comber, and he was one of the founders of this congregation. Again, when she is commissioning the window, she has to think very carefully about the subject and what she wants in it. And it ends up being the two people who actually would have been the most significant adults in her family, in her life. Because when she was only 4, she'd lost her father. He died of cholera in New York.
Yes.
And the family had returned from America back to Ireland, where she was brought up. So I think, you know, it's interesting that John Miller was such an influence. And one of her sons, she calls him John Miller Andrews, after Uncle John.
It's amazing the you know, the Andrews family of the Titanic fame
Oh, yes.
has a big, you know, connection here with this church. It's a massive
Very
history.
much so. And when it comes to the pew, this is the family pew that they were sat in. And we know this because the minister drew out a map. And
This one here, is it? Yes.
This one here. He drew out a map, and he had put all the family names in it, because in those days the minister would have received the pew rents, and it was part of his income.
Yes.
So it was very important that he knew. And the lovely thing about that is when we have people coming to visit this church who have had ancestors who are members of the church, we can quite often get that book out and say, your family sat here, which I
Yes.
think is lovely. It's just, you know, that sort of...
It has a personal touch.
It adds a personal touch. This pew was also an Andrews family pew, but this was a different branch. There's actually a connection with the Dwins family, because Edmund Dwins, get this right now, was his brother had married into the Andrews family, and one of the Andrews girls was his wife. And again, the little memorial we have over here, which is by Rosalind Prager, this is for that family. And they lived in a place called Ewermore. Sadly, that has been demolished, but it would have been opposite Supervalue. So you can sort of see we press on, and it's got the names. So the James Andrews at the top, he would have been Thomas Andrews' great-grandfather, and the I think John was mentioned next, he would have been his grandfather, but then it's sort of splits. So it's,
And what about the top window then?
well, that's Faith and Hope. So
Faith and Hope, so that's...
the anchor of hope.
Yes.
And obviously, you know, that is a gesture sort of faith.
Ah, yes, so that's the one you mentioned at the start then?
Yes, so that's Faith, Hope and Charity.
Yes. And there was something you were going to say earlier, Ian. Was there anything you wanted to add? You were going to say something?
Very minor detail that following the Blitz in 1941.
Oh, yes. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I wasn't alive at the time, but the 4 windows which went in the 1920s, they were taken out temporarily
Yes.
following the Blitz, because obviously there was the fear that
They would be
Germans
destroyed.
would be return and damage. John Miller Andrews, member of this congregation, wartime Prime Minister, second Prime Minister of Northern Ireland after Sir James Craig. And the stained glass windows, the 4 stained glass windows, are removed temporarily for safekeeping,
Yes.
I think to Redemen, and then brought back at the end, either at the end of the war or when it was clear
Yes.
that the Germans would not be returning.
And then you have a wee book with pictures.
Yes, I mean, there's...
Could we have a look at that?
And my wife will tell all about that. And just the little background to it is that it was a former member of the congregation, sadly now dead, a lady called Gertie Ritchie, who had, you know, a brainwave involving another member of the congregation, a young Sunday school pupil, now a medical doctor. and it was to compile a photo album of members of the congregation. And just as your handheld device now is the means for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of photographs, what we have in the photo album are good old-fashioned, old-time photographs taken with a roll of film and developed. And again, a reminder of a time when taking a photograph was quite a special event, not the everyday event
Yes.
that it is today.
Well, what we'll do is we'll wrap this wee video here up, and then we'll do the next one on the photo album. Now, I believe there's a famous minister in there who is called, his first name I think is called Ian. Is that correct?
Oh, notorious.
So we'll have a look at this minister called Ian then in the next video. So if you enjoy the channel, again, please like and subscribe, and watch out for the next wee video, because we're going to have a look at a wee bit of the history here of the ministers in this church. God bless.